Well, it's time to answer this week's challenge, and I am actually in a hotel room here in Florida. And do you know how you can tell that I'm in a hotel room? The ugly artwork, right? So I'm down here working with Praise Mills Baptist Church from Georgia, doing a youth camp for them. In fact, wearing my youth camp t-shirt. See, Rick? I told you I'd wear it for the challenge. All right, so let's get to the challenge, this week's challenge. If God requires atonement, he lacks something. So the question was this: God is defined as an almighty being. An almighty being does not require atonement for sins. Therefore, if God requires atonement, as the Bible says, he is imperfect and not almighty. In other words, philosophically, the need for atonement indicates a lack of something, which detracts from the perfection which God should have. So that's the challenge. I think the key in answering a challenge like this is getting some definitions out on the table. Okay. Now, it seems to me that we want to define something like omnipotent or almighty, and almighty is omnipotence, right? It's the idea that God is all-powerful. You want to define atonement. What's it mean to atone for something? To atone means to make amends for a wrong. We'll want to define the idea of require here. What's it mean to require something? Well, requirement seems to be kind of like a demand. There's a demand. If I require something, I demand this from you. And then there's the word need that is used here. Need seems to indicate some kind of a lack. There's a dependency, right? I need this from you. And so those are, I think, key terms to define in answering this challenge. Now, number one, I think probably the objector maybe is got the wrong attribute in mind. Now, it's not God's all-powerfulness, his omnipotence that seems to be in question here, but it's the idea that God is self-existent, God is self-sufficient. That's the view that there is no necessary relation that God has to anything outside of himself. Everything about God, there's no contingency or dependency. For us, now we are radically dependent on him. We need him for our existence. If God didn't exist, there would be no us, no world. But if we didn't exist, God's unaffected. Okay, so everything else is contingent, but God is not contingent. He's necessary. He's self-sufficient, self-existent. So that seems to be kind of what's in view. That's the attribute maybe this person's kind of going after. But then when we look at what he said here, he seems to equivocate, meaning he seems to use require and need in the same way. So at one point he says God requires atonement, but then this need for atonement seems to show that he's imperfect. But I don't think require and need are the same thing. Need seems to communicate some kind of dependency. Require seems to communicate some kind of demand. They're not the same thing. God is not dependent on atonement. And when we think about his attributes, and this is where it's important to think about all of his attributes and how they relate to one another. Yes, God is self-existent. Yes, God is loving and gracious and merciful. But yes, God is just. And it's his justice that demands atonement for sin. It's his love and his mercy that offer atonement to us for sin. So atonement is demanded, but it's not needed. God is not somehow dependent upon atonement. God is not dependent on us in any kind of way. There's no contingency, no dependency when it comes to God and creatures. He doesn't create out of any need. He creates out of his good pleasure. So atonement is not needed by God. It's demanded by God. Now, atonement cannot be demanded by us. It's needed by us. And so I think when we offer these proper definitions, we answer the challenge. In fact, I think there was a great analogy that one of our commenters gave, kind of the analogy of a professor. You take a professor's class. He doesn't need you in that class, but he does have demands or requirements. Now, if you want the grade, you need to do this assignment and this assignment and this assignment. So the need is within us, not within God. And so God's perfection still stands. There is no need within God. And another challenge is answered. I'm going to the beach right now. Bye.